talk about file input input output. So file So what are files? Files are, you know what files are. Files are objects where you can store text data on the disk. In the simplest form, you can store text data on the disk. And files are read from the disk in a buffered way. So there's a so you have a file residing on the disk. So this is the disk, and you have so there is an intermediate buffer, and this is where this is your program, and the program doesn't directly interact with the disk. It interacts with something called the buffer. Okay, so when you read a file, parts of the file are copied to the buffer, and then from there the program reads it. Similarly, when you write to the buffer, when you want to write to the disk, so this is a file. When you want to write, so this is a read. And similarly, when you want to write, you write to the buffer, and the buffer then periodically, or when you explicitly flush the buffer, it puts it in the disk. Correct? So reads and writes are indirect via buffers. Correct? Now you have to name a buffer before you can use it. Correct? You have to associate a buffer with the file before you can start using it. And this is done via the open command. Correct? So fh is equal to open file name. The file name is the name of the file, comma, let's say read. Correct? Similarly, you can say fh is equal to open file name. So this is in file name, out file name, comma write. That is write. Are you with me?
Yes, sir.
And there are other modes also, like append, and there are several more. You can check. The append means that instead of writing, it's a version of writing, but instead of writing from the beginning of the file, it starts writing from a particular place. And what is that place? That is at the end of the file. So it appends to the file. It adds to the file.
So here the variable that you're declaring is the buffer.
This is the name of the file. This is the name of the buffer. It's also called a file handler. Correct? And now when you want to do a write or a read, this is fh1, this is fh2. You do fh1 dot read command, like fh1 dot read, and so on. Correct? So we will get into these commands in a bit. So what was the question? Sorry, I missed the question. Was there a question about buffers and file handlers and so on?
No, sir, it's all right.
Okay. So fh1 is a file handler. It is the name of a data structure which contains enough information about the buffer so that you can read from it or write to it. Correct? And now there are many read and write commands. We will talk about some of them. So you can say, for example, okay, even before that, once you open the file, you do a bunch of reads and writes. And then finally, or if it's a read file, if you're reading from the file, you do reads. If you are writing the file, you do writes. And at the end, you say fh1.close or fh2.close. So that is to close the connection between the file handler and the disk. So fh2 is just a name. It contains a file handler and which contains details of this connection, details of the connection between these two, correct? The buffer and the file. And when you say fh1.close or fh2.close, then this connection is closed, correct?
Sir,
Tell me.
what do you mean the connection is closed? Like what happened?
What happens is that the variable, the value contained in the name fh1 is no longer associated with the file. Now, so if you try to access again, you want to write to that file handler again. So suppose you do at this point, you do fh1, you do this fh1.read, correct?
Yeah.
Then you will get an error. You can try it out yourself. You will get an error, an exception. We talked about exceptions last time. You will get an exception. What is the precise name of that exception? I don't remember, but you will get an exception. And you can try it out and you will find it yourself. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, so it will be file not found error or exception.
And sir, what is the function of buffer? Just
The function of the buffer is you don't. So this comes from classical, the way computers are built. You don't have access to files directly. So you don't have access to the disk directly. So you communicate with the disk in terms of so pages are brought from the disk to the buffer, and then you can alter them or whatever you want to do with them. Correct? Read from there, write to them. So because from the disk and to the disk, the operations are bulk operations. It's much more efficient to do it not byte by byte or bit by bit, but in large chunks of data. So large chunks of data communicate between the buffer and the file, correct? And the disk, sorry, correct? So this communication is in large chunks of data. On the other hand, you might be writing just one letter, correct? So that would be very inefficient if the system were to go and write just one letter to the, or one symbol to the disk. Instead, it's done in batches. It's done in terms of bulk writes. So you keep on writing to the buffer. When the buffer becomes full, it is sent to the disk. It's written to the disk.
okay, sir. Yes, I got it.
Correct? Okay. So
Sir,
now,
follow-up question, sir.
Yeah,
but what if I want to write one letter? So I do this and I use this buffer that I've made, opened to write one letter. What
then you
happens?
can explicitly say fh2.flush. You can flush the buffer, which means all its contents will be written to the disk immediately.
Okay, so if I write one letter and then I open the file on my computer, I will not see the changes.
You will not see the changes. Yes, not necessarily.
Right.
If you write a letter and you do not flush, you just write the one letter and then you will see that the file is open. I mean, for example, if it's a new file, you will see that the file has been created, but you won't be able to, it will show 0 characters.
Right. And when I close the buffer also, that would flush it as well.
Then it would flush it before, automatically flush it before closing the connection.
Right. Got it, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So, so is that clear? More questions? Okay, so some of the commands that are read commands are fh.read without any arguments. This gives you the entire file. So you do contents equal to fh1.read. Entire file is read as a string to contents, as a string. Right? And put in the name that you attach here. Contents. So contains the entire file as a string. Correct? You can also give arguments to this, and I will just deal with the basic case. When you say fh1 dot read n, then it reads n characters. Okay.
So,
Tell me.
sorry, what's written to the left of FH read content?
Content. Yeah, it's just a variable name. So, correct? You can call it any variable. Any variable is equal to fh1.read.
Yes, sir.
N chars is equal to fh1.read n. Correct? Okay. Then you have also things like fh1.read line. Correct? And this reads to the next new line inclusive. Correct? So you are in the middle of a file which is, we are assuming that you are dealing with text files here. So in text files, they are assumed to be new line separated, and read line reads to the next new line. Probably there are optional arguments here. It can read to any character that you provide, any separator you provide, and I invite you to look up the documentation to do in order to do that. But by default, it does this, right? Reads to the next new line. Correct?
So fh1.read, that will just drop the new lines into the single string and keep going.
fh.read will just take the entire contents of the file and put them in this variable and return them.
So if there are new lines, it will take them as new lines and keep going.
Yes, it will just take the entire string, new lines, white space, everything.
Okay.
The entire file. Correct? Here it will just go up till the new line and include it and put it in N. Correct? And now you do fh1.read lines. Correct? Then it will give you a list of lines. So puts all the lines in the list, inclusive of new lines. Correct? So every line, so it is like a bunch of read lines. And only thing is it returns a list of lines. Correct? Are you with me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So these are about reads. You can even start reading from an arbitrary point in the file.
Sir,
Certainly.
sir, read lines will read all the lines in the file.
Read lines will read all the lines in the file. Yes.
So, what if I just need 2 or 3 lines?
You can, one thing is that you can use read line 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
And the other option is, I guess, and I'm just guessing, you check up this thing, there is an optional argument here. Just check it out.
Okay.
But
Read lines mean you can take a slice.
read lines may you can take a slice, meaning?
FHL dot read lines, it gives you a
Huh.
list, right?
Yes.
So you can take a slice of that list.
Yes, but maybe you don't want to read all the lines. That's his point. The file is like 1 gigabyte. You don't want to read 1 gigabyte of data and then take a slice of 3 lines. You get my point?
Yes.
So you could do that. You could, of course, read the entire thing and then take a slice. But you could also, I suppose you can also give an argument here, but check it out. Otherwise, you can run this in a tight loop and do it 2-3 times or whatever, however many times you want. Or separated by a while condition or something, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then you can also do this fh1 or fh2.seek. So this takes the file handler and sets it at position n, at byte number n or character n of the file, correct? So it doesn't do any read or write, it just resets the file to n length, correct?
Sir, sorry to interrupt. I just checked for the documentation for read lines.
Huh?
It's not, it has an optional parameter, but it's in terms of bytes and not lines.
Okay, okay, fine. So b is equal to bytes, number of bytes, correct?
The optional parameter, the key is a hint. HINT, hint
Huh?
is the optional parameter that it takes, and then its
Okay.
value is supposed to be in bytes. And
Okay.
if the total data returned exceeds the number of bytes, then that's where it will stop.
Correct. And it breaks the bytes into lines.
I'm not sure about that, sir, but I'm just telling you what I read.
Yes, yes. So that's what it does, I think. That's a natural thing to assume, that it breaks these into lines. The last line might be missing a new line. So it just separates it on the basis of new lines. So if you say 100, it will read in 100 characters. And if the lines are like, I don't know, 80 characters, then it will split it into 180 character line and 20 characters after that. Something like that, correct? You can try it out and see. It's intuitive. It's not very, not to be intuitive, correct? Okay, that said,
file handlers are like the buffer reader is an example of file handler, right?
yes, file handler is a data structure that contains information about the buffer.
Okay, so in Python we have only buffer, except that we can't like input out.
So
Like in
there are
Java,
sockets and
isn't-
various other things.
Oh, okay.
So
are
those things
those
are
also
not.
file handlers or not?
So there is some notion of file handler, but I mean, in general, in Unix, in particular, there are various types of things, and they are all addressed by similar data structures. I don't know about Python in particular. So network programming, especially, there are many different kinds of objects which allow you to do I/O.
So SSH is also an IO example, right?
Huh?
Like what we do to CMI computers.
Which one?
SSH, secure shell.
SSH is also a secure I/O. Yes, there's a key exchange this thing first and so on. But the part we are talking about is just individual reads and writes, correct? And yeah, so
Like, can SSH like thing be simulated using this buffer or something in our computer to access one file or something? Is it the
Yes,
cryptographic
yes,
parts
probably
only?
there is a secure this thing inside Python. You'll have to check the this thing. Yes, you can check the reference, and there'll be a network library that allows you to do that.
Okay, sir.
So,
Sir,
tell me.
could you repeat what seek does? I didn't understand. You said it sets it at the
So
end.
when you suppose this is your file, correct? It's a sequential string and so on, correct? So when you start reading this file, for example, you start from this point 0. So the 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on, correct? Rather, I should put it. It is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, correct? So,
Yes.
and initially you are at 0, and then you start. Now, if you say seek 5, it would put it at this place. The input, the place where you will do the next read will be from the 5th spot.
Oh, okay, sir. Yeah.
Correct? And similarly, when you do append, it's like seek to the end of the file. And then you do the writes from there. If you open it in the append mode, remember there was this append mode, correct? It is like a seek to the end of the file.
Yes.
Okay. So, we were talking about reads, that is input. Now we talk about output, correct? So output is something like fh2. fh2 was our write file handler. That's why I'm saying fh2. It could be anything. fh2 dot write is write a string, correct? So this writes string s, correct? Write string s. Not be scopes, correct? And it doesn't automatically put in new lines, correct? Doesn't put a new line at the end of s. It will just write s in the file. If you want to put a new line, you add it yourself inside s, correct? And similarly, you have a bunch of write lines L, correct? So here it writes the strings in L, correct? And I should let's say new line not added by command. Here also no new lines, no backslash n's are added by write lines, correct? So, for example, if you do write lines and you have a bunch of lines like so, suppose your L were equal to something, comma, or the other. When you say fh2 dot write lines L, it would just write something or the other without any gaps, without any new lines, correct? And if you say, on the other hand, L is equal to the same thing with new lines at the end of each one, then it would add new lines, correct? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
So in particular, if you want to copy one file to another, you can just do read lines and then write lines. Correct? So you can just say read edge, the read handler is equal to open read file dot txt, assuming this is the name of the file, comma read, and write edge is equal to open write file dot txt, write, and then just say r is equal to rl is equal to read lines rs dot read lines, correct? And then you do wh, so you do wh dot write lines rl. That would copy all the lines. Is it clear? Am I making sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I have talked about close and flush before. So this is about IO. This is almost everything that I'm going to say about IO. Correct? So if you have questions about this, ask me now.
So can you repeat about the flush?
So the flush thing just writes the buffer to the file. If you do it on a write file, write file, it flushes the buffer to the whatever is written in the buffer. It flushes it to the file disk. So it appears on the disk.
Yes, sir.
Correct. That is about all.
So could you repeat what you said about hint and bytes for read lines?
Sorry, about what? Sorry, read lines and
Read
about
lines.
hint.
Yeah.
So read lines hint. What it does is that it reads in hint many lines, hint many bytes in the form of lines to a list. Takes the first after the current position. It takes hint many bytes, breaks them into lines by new line, and puts them in a list.
Okay.
Correct? Okay. Then having done IO, we want to actually do something with the data that we have read or written. Correct? We want to process the data. Correct? If you have read in data from the file, you want to do some processing on the data. Correct? So some useful operations on strings are needed. And so the first thing that we saw was that when you do read lines or read line, it does not remove the new lines at the end. Correct? So you need a way to remove that junk from the end. Correct? So for example, if you have a string S which contains new line, how will you remove the new line? Do in particular, you can do let's see. What? Give me 1 second. Oh. Sorry, I don't know what's happening. Why is it being... this Apple Pencil to work, so I can't write on this thing. Let's conclude the lecture here today. Next time I'll go a bit longer. Is that okay? Hello?
Yes, sir. Sir, after your lecture, we have another lecture at 5, and your lecture gets over at 4:45. So between that, I mean, I don't think any of us would mind extending.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, we'll cover up quick, slowly. Correct. So I don't know what is happening. This pencil suddenly stopped working, and I have no idea why it stopped working. I'll have to reboot the device, and all that will. Correct. Okay. Sorry about this, and we'll meet next time, next Tuesday. Correct.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.